The email said all hands meeting, Building 4 auditorium, 2 p.m. sharp. That's what popped up on my screen on a Tuesday afternoon in late September. I'm Frank Delaney, 56 years old, and I've been running the structural engineering division at Hargrove and Crane Construction for the past 29 years. I started at this company when I was 27, fresh off a stint with the Army Corps of Engineers, and I've outlasted 3 CEOs, 2 recessions, and 1 near bankruptcy. But when I walked into that auditorium and saw the projector screen already lit up with the company logo and 2 HR representatives I didn't recognize sitting in the front row, my gut told me something was off. You know that silence that fills a room when bad news is about to land? Not the comfortable quiet of people waiting for a meeting to start. The other kind. The kind where nobody makes eye contact, where people suddenly find their phones very interesting, where the air itself feels heavier. That's what hit me the moment I stepped through the door. The auditorium seats about 300 people. Hargrove and Crane has grown a lot since I joined. Back then, we were 40 engineers working out of a converted warehouse in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Now we're a $1.2 billion firm with offices in 6 states and contracts stretching from Boston to Miami. And sitting on the stage, adjusting his tie like he was about to deliver a TED Talk, was Kevin Pratt, our CEO for the past 4 years. He's 41, Harvard MBA, never poured a foundation or read a soil report in his life, but he sure knows how to impress a boardroom. I took my usual seat near the middle of the room, 5th row, aisle seat. Same spot I've sat in for every company meeting since they built this auditorium in 2014. My project manager, Elena Voss, was 2 rows ahead, and she turned around to give me this look. Not a smile, not a wave, just this look, like she was trying to warn me about something but couldn't find the words. I should have paid more attention to that. Kevin stepped up to the microphone, buttoned his jacket, and started talking about evolution. That was his favorite word, evolution. Evolving the brand, evolving the workforce, evolving the culture. Every quarterly meeting had at least 12 mentions of evolution. I used to count them. But today wasn't about quarterly numbers. Today, Kevin announced a strategic restructuring designed to position Hargrove and Crane for the next era of infrastructure development. Translation: layoffs. And when the first name that came out of his mouth was mine, I felt the floor shift beneath me, the same way unstable ground shifts before a sinkhole opens. Frank Delaney has been a valued member of our team, Kevin said, reading from a tablet. But as we align our workforce with emerging technologies and next-generation methodologies, we've made the difficult decision to transition his role to our new AI-integrated design division. Transition. That's the corporate word for "you're done." He didn't even look at me when he said it. He was looking at the board members in the front row, at the investors watching on the video call, at the HR people nodding along like this was perfectly normal. 29 years. I'd built this company's reputation with my bare hands and a calculator. Every bridge, every overpass, every parking structure, every hospital foundation that Hargrove and Crane put its name on in the last 3 decades went through my desk first. I personally signed off on the structural integrity of over 340 projects worth a combined $8.7 billion, not one failure, not one crack, not one lawsuit, 0. And Kevin Pratt just erased all of that with one sentence delivered from a stage he had no business standing on. Here's the thing about turning 56 inches the construction industry. The young engineers look at you like you're a relic. They've got their 3D modeling software, their drone surveys, their generative AI design tools. And yeah, those things are great. I'm not some dinosaur who thinks computers are a fad, but they don't replace the thing I spent 29 years building, the thing you can't download or update with a software patch. Judgment. See, I know things about the ground in this part of the country that no algorithm can tell you. I know that the clay deposits along the I-95 corridor in southern Connecticut shift differently than the ones up near Hartford. I know that the bedrock in lower Manhattan has fault lines that don't show up on standard geological surveys because they're too small for the equipment to detect, but big enough to compromise a 4-0-story building over 20 years. I know which concrete suppliers cut their mix ratios when demand is high, and which steel fabricators deliver specs that are just barely within tolerance. You can't put that in a database. That's 29 years of showing up, paying attention, and caring enough to remember. But Kevin didn't want experience. Kevin wanted flash. Kevin wanted the kind of engineering team that looked good in a press release and impressed the investors at Meridian Pacific, the Hong Kong-based infrastructure fund that was about to pour $780 million into Hargrove and Crane's biggest project ever. the Atlantic Corridor Bridge, a 2.3-mile cable-stayed bridge connecting two barrier islands off the coast of South Carolina. This wasn't just any bridge. It was a $780 million federal and private partnership, the kind of project that makes or breaks a company's legacy, and the entire structural certification package. Every load calculation, every soil analysis, every wind tolerance model, every seismic assessment sat in a system that I had personally designed and maintained for the past 19 years. Let me explain what that means. After the 2007 I-35W bridge collapse in Minneapolis, the federal government overhauled how structural certifications work for major infrastructure projects. Any bridge project receiving federal funds over $100 million requires what's called a Tier 4 independent verification, which means a licensed professional engineer with specific project history has to personally certify every critical calculation. The PE's digital signature is cryptographically linked to the verification platform. You can't fake it, you can't transfer it, and you can't bypass it. It's literally built into federal law. I am the PE of record on the Atlantic Corridor Bridge project. My license, my signature, my verification. Nobody else at Hargrove and Crane holds the specific project certifications required to complete that package. It would take a minimum of 14 months to get another engineer certified, and the federal construction window closes in 6 months. Kevin Pratt had just fired the only person who could deliver his $780 million bridge. After the announcement, I didn't make a scene. I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice, didn't ask why. I just stood up, straightened my jacket, and walked toward the exit. The room was dead quiet except for my footsteps on the linoleum. I could feel 300 pairs of eyes on my back, and I didn't turn around once. Elena caught up with me in the hallway. "Frank, wait, please." She looked like she was about to cry, and Elena Voss doesn't cry. She's managed $200 million projects without breaking a sweat. But this got to her. "I didn't know," she said. "I swear I didn't know he was going to do this. I found out 20 minutes before the meeting." "I believe you," I said. "Keep your head down, Elena. You've got 2 kids in college. Don't make yourself a target." She grabbed my arm. "This is wrong. You know it's wrong. That bridge project can't move forward without you." "I know," I said. "And pretty soon, Kevin's going to know it too." The security guard who walked me to my car was a kid named Marcus, maybe 25, 26 years old. He was apologetic, kept saying sorry, sir, over and over. I told him it was fine, not his fault, just doing his job. When we got to the parking lot, he shook my hand and said something I didn't expect. "My dad's an electrician, Mr. Delaney. He's been in the trade for 35 years. He always says the guys in suits don't understand what keeps the lights on. I think he's right." That hit me harder than Kevin's little speech. I drove home to our house in Fairfield. It's a 3-bedroom colonial that my wife Carol and I bought 22 years ago when our daughter Sophie was a baby. The mortgage has $94,000 left on it, about $1,800 a month. Sophie's in her 2nd year of medical school at Johns Hopkins, $67,000 a year. Carol works part-time at the town library, brings in maybe $28,000. My salary was $195,000. Was. Past tense. I sat in the driveway for 10 minutes before going inside. Carol was in the kitchen, making soup, and she knew something was wrong the moment she saw my face. After 31 years of marriage, you can't hide anything. I told her everything. She didn't panic. She's never been the panicking type. She just put down the ladle, sat across from me at the kitchen table, and said, "Frank, you built half the bridges in this state. They'll figure out they need you. And when they do, you make them earn it." That woman has always been smarter than me. The first call came 8 hours later. Not from Kevin. From his chief operating officer, Diana Walsh. A woman I'd worked with for 15 years before Kevin promoted her into a role she never wanted. Diana was a good engineer who got turned into a corporate mouthpiece, and you could hear the strain in her voice. "Frank, we've run into a complication with the Atlantic Corridor certification package," she said, choosing her words carefully. "Our legal team is reviewing the PE requirements, and we were hoping you might be available for a brief consulting engagement to help with the transition." Consulting engagement. That's corporate speak for we screwed up and we need you to fix it, but we don't want to admit we screwed up. "Diana," I said, "you and I both know this isn't a complication. It's a wall. My PE license is personally tied to every calculation in that package. There's no shortcut, no workaround, and no amount of legal review that changes federal infrastructure law. Silence. Then, in a quieter voice, I told him this would happen. He wouldn't listen. I felt for her. Diana was caught between a CEO who didn't understand engineering and a federal deadline that didn't care about corporate politics. But sympathy doesn't pay my mortgage. I wish you the best, Diana, I said. But I'm not in a position to help Hargrove and Crane right now. 2 days later, the situation escalated. Kevin, in his infinite wisdom, hired an outside engineering firm to attempt an emergency recertification of the bridge project. They brought in a team of 8 engineers, rented a war room at the Marriott downtown, and started trying to reverse engineer my verification framework. What Kevin didn't understand, and what those 8 engineers discovered within 72 hours, is that Tier 4 verification isn't just a signature, it's a chain of custody. Every calculation references the previous one. Every soil test links to a specific site visit conducted by a specific licensed engineer. Every wind model is calibrated against data that I personally collected over 19 years of working in the Southeast Coastal Corridor. Pull one link out of that chain, and the entire package has to be rebuilt from scratch. Not revised, rebuilt. Starting with new soil borings, new environmental assessments, new everything. The outside firm sent Kevin a memo estimating 16 to 22 months to recertify the project. The federal construction window was 6 months away. Kevin's $780 million bridge was dead in the water. That's when the news broke. A reporter at the Charleston Post and Courier got hold of the story, probably from someone inside the outside engineering firm. The headline read, "Atlantic Corridor Bridge Project Faces Indefinite Delay After Key Engineer Dismissed." Within hours, it was picked up by the national trade press, then the financial outlets. Hargrove and Crane's stock dropped 9% in a single trading day. My phone started ringing. Former colleagues, old friends from the Army Corps, recruiters I hadn't heard from in years. And then, on a Friday evening, while Carol and I were eating leftover pasta in the kitchen, a call from an 843 area code. Charleston, South Carolina. Mr. Delaney, my name is James Okoro. I'm the Director of Infrastructure for the South Carolina Department of Transportation. I set down my fork. We've been monitoring the situation with the Atlantic Corridor project very closely, he continued. As you know, the state has significant investment in this bridge, both financial and political. The governor's office is concerned about the delays, and we've been conducting our own review of the certification requirements. I can imagine, I said. What he told me next changed everything. The state's review had uncovered something that went beyond simple delays. In the process of examining why the certification couldn't be transferred, their auditors had found discrepancies in the project's financial documentation. Specifically, change orders that inflated material costs by an estimated $23 million, with the excess funds routed through a network of subcontractors that, upon closer inspection, appeared to be shell companies. Kevin Pratt's restructuring wasn't just about modernizing the workforce. It was about removing the one person meticulous enough to notice that the numbers didn't add up. Mr. Delaney, Okoro said, we'd like you to meet with our forensic engineering team. Separately, the FBI's Public Corruption Unit has expressed interest in your documentation. I spent the next 3 weeks working with federal investigators and state auditors, walking them through 19 years of records. Every project file I'd ever kept, every calculation I'd ever flagged as questionable, every email where I'd raised concerns about cost overruns that didn't match material deliveries. The investigators were thorough and patient, and they treated me with a respect I hadn't felt in years. One of them, an agent named Robert Torres, told me during a coffee break that my record keeping was the most comprehensive he'd ever seen from a private sector engineer. You kept everything, he said, almost in disbelief. I'm an engineer, I told him. We don't throw things away, we document them. While the investigation unfolded quietly behind the scenes, Kevin was putting on a show for the media. He gave interviews about innovation, about the future of American infrastructure, about how Hargrove and Crane was leading the way with cutting-edge technology. He even announced a new partnership with some Silicon Valley AI firm that was going to revolutionize structural engineering. Stock bumped up 2 points on the news. That bump lasted exactly 1 week. On a Monday morning in November, FBI agents executed search warrants at Hargrove and Crane's corporate headquarters in Bridgeport and at Kevin Pratt's personal residence in Westport. They seized computers, hard drives, financial records, and phones. Kevin was photographed being escorted from the building in a blue suit, no handcuffs yet, but the image was devastating. It ran on every news outlet in the country. The charges came down 2 weeks later. Wire fraud, conspiracy to defraud the federal government, money laundering, tax evasion. The shell companies were traced back to Kevin and 2 members of the board who had been skimming from federal infrastructure contracts for at least 4 years. The $23 million in fraudulent change orders was just the beginning. The full scope of the scheme, once forensic accountants finished their work, exceeded $47 million. Every major project Kevin had touched was now under scrutiny. Every contract, every subcontractor relationship, every financial approval. And the one thing that kept coming up in every investigator's report was my verification system. The framework I'd built hadn't just protected the structural integrity of our bridges. It had created a paper trail so detailed and so interconnected that the fraud couldn't hide from it. 3 days after Kevin's arrest, my phone rang again. This time, it was Arthur Crane himself. Arthur is 78 years old, the surviving founder of Hargrove & Crane. He'd been in semi-retirement for a decade, living on his farm in Litchfield County, raising horses and avoiding corporate politics. But Kevin's arrest had pulled him back in. "Frank," he said, and his voice sounded tired. "I owe you an apology. I should have been paying closer attention. I let that boy run my company into the ground." "Arthur, it's not your fault," I said. "The hell it isn't. I hired him. I ignored the warning signs because he made the numbers look good, and I let him push out the best engineer I've ever worked with." He paused, and I could hear him breathing on the other end. Then he said something I wasn't expecting. "I'm coming back. Temporarily. The board asked me to step in as interim CEO while we sort out this mess. And the first thing I'm doing is asking you to come back. Not just to your old job. I want you to run the engineering division, Vice President of Structural Engineering, full authority over the Atlantic Corridor project and every other active contract, salary of $310,000, plus a retroactive severance package for the time you were wrongfully terminated." I sat there in my living room, looking at the stack of bills on the coffee table, looking at Sophie's med school tuition statement pinned to the refrigerator with a magnet, looking at Carol watching me from the doorway with that quiet confidence she's always had. "I have conditions," I said. "Name them." Elena Voss gets promoted to senior project manager. Marcus, the security guard, gets transferred to the facilities team with full benefits. No more contract labor. And every employee who was laid off in Kevin's restructuring gets a call with an offer to return. Arthur didn't hesitate. Done. I started the new role on a Monday. When I walked through the front doors of Building 4, the same auditorium where Kevin had fired me was empty and dark, but the engineering floor was buzzing. Elena was already there, reorganizing project files. 2 of the engineers who'd been let go in the restructuring had come back. And on my new desk, which was in the corner office I'd never wanted but now felt right, someone had left a card. It was from Marcus. "Mr. Delaney," it said, "my dad says to tell you. The guys in suits finally figured out who keeps the lights on. The Atlantic Corridor Bridge project was back on track within 6 weeks. I worked with SCDOT to secure a federal extension, personally presenting the revised certification package to the review board in Washington. They approved it unanimously. The bridge broke ground the following spring, on schedule and under budget for the first time in the project's history. Kevin Pratt pleaded guilty to 4 federal charges and was sentenced to 11 years in prison. His 2 co-conspirators on the board received 7 and 9 years respectively. Hargrove & Crane paid $38 million in restitution and fines, but the company survived. Arthur made sure of that. Sophie came home for Thanksgiving that year. She's going to be a surgeon, my daughter. Smartest person in our family by a mile. When she asked me about everything that had happened, I told her the truth. All of it. The firing, the investigation, the offer, everything. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Dad, you spent 29 years building things that protect people. And when they tried to tear that down, the work you did protected you right back. That's not luck. That's integrity." Carol reached across the table and squeezed my hand. She didn't need to say anything. After 31 years, some things don't need words. The mortgage was paid off by February. Sophie's tuition was covered through graduation. And for the first time in my career, I was working for someone who understood that experience isn't a liability. It's the foundation everything else is built on. Last month, I drove across the Atlantic Corridor Bridge for the first time. It was early morning, the sun coming up over the water, casting long shadows across the cables. Carol was in the passenger seat. We didn't say much. I just drove slowly, feeling the road beneath us. Solid and sure. exactly the way I designed it. You know what I've learned after 30 years in this business? Buildings don't stand because of the people who take credit for them. They stand because of the people who show up every day, check the numbers twice, and refuse to cut corners even when nobody's watching. That's true for bridges. And, honestly, I think it's true for everything else worth building in this life. At 57, getting fired wasn't the end of my story. It was the chapter where the story finally started making sense.